Viking Congress. I'm Dr. Jarman, and I'm delighted that you can join me here today for this live stream event where I will be talking to Dr. Fedir Androshchuk, who's the director of the National Museum of the History of Ukraine, about the impact of the current war on his museum, on his country's heritage, and how that relates to the world of the Vikings and that Viking history. I just want to say, if you're watching this from home in the live stream, you can actually come and ask some questions to Fedir. So if you go in the chat function of the YouTube channel just on the right, you can put your questions in there and we'll have some time for those at the end. The other thing we're doing with this event is we are helping to raise funds for Fedir and the museum. So if you look at the description on the YouTube channel, it'll give you all the details of how you can help, provide help to the museum, funding that they desperately need to continue their work there. But really, what we're going to be talking about today starts with the invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February this year. And on that day, Fedir's responsibilities changed from his ordinary museum tasks to coordinating the efforts to protect the museum's objects and their heritage from the invasion, from bombs, from thefts, from looting. We are really delighted that we've been able to have Fedir with us at this Congress. This is the Viking Age conference. He's already been here for a week or so, talking and presenting his own research as well. So very welcome to Liverpool, Fedir.
Thank you very much. This is the first time I'm in Liverpool, yes.
It's great that you'll be able to safely come out. We're obviously very grateful for that. Also want to acknowledge the British Academy for funding
yes,
both our participation.
I'm very grateful for this, yes, of course.
Absolutely, and the University of Liverpool for organising it, and History Hit for bringing it out to the world. And of course, the reason, one of the big reasons why we're here talking about this now is that the whole history, the Viking Age history, the early history of Ukraine and also of Russia relates very much to the Viking Age. So we're going to be talking about that a bit later on and how that relates to the current conflict as well. But I wanted to just start with just a few of the basics, really, and one of them is the museum. So the museum that you're the director of, what sort of a museum is it?
Well, this is the largest museum of Ukraine, which has, I think, 800,000 objects. It's quite a lot, which are dated from the prehistorical time until the Russian invasion. And it actually was founded 1899, so it's quite old museum, but it was founded as a city museum. But when Ukraine became independent in 1991, it gained the status of national museum.
So you've got some fantastic collections there.
That's great.
And I mean, I think because we are here at a Viking Age conference with sort of the world's top experts in the Viking Age latest research, I think maybe it's quite interesting to give some of the context of how, especially that Viking Age history has been really quite politicized over the years, because that relates to the conflict as it is today as well. And this role of Scandinavia, especially the sort of role in the formation of what later become the Rus and then into Russia, has been a very controversial and political topic. Becomes what known as the Normanist debate or controversy. Yes, I wondered if you could just give us a sort of very brief introduction to some of that history.
Yeah. Well, we do know that the Viking is a conventional term from the seafaring people trading and riding and colonizing part of the European countries. And you can find the Vikings in Russian history. And the reason for this is that they were called by two other terms, the Rus and the Varangians. And both are mentioned in the Tale of Bygone Years, which is actually a literary piece of a source which is basically dated to the beginning of 12th century, and which is translated some recently titled as a Russian primary chronicle. But this source actually tells us about the history, so-called invitation of the Varangians to rule over the Slavonic and Finnic-speaking population. And this is basically the start of this debate because debate about the origin of Russian state, and this is the start actually when the Rus began called by the Russians. And of course there have been other opinions, different opinions, which actually were trying to identify the Varangians and the Rus as Scandinavians. They became called as an anti-Normanism. And this is debates, right? They started in the 18th century and were basically are continuing, have been continued until the recently time. But during the Soviet time, it tend to be, these discussions tend to be like a debate between two academic seats. One of them is situated in Moscow, with another one in Leningrad. And Leningrad scholars, they were representing anti-Normanistic position, and those who were working in the Moscow anti-Normanistic. But this was a kind of a form to be an anti-Normanism that Normanism at that time. It was like a form of academic, to be academic dissident. And the explanation for this is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, nobody of these Normanists, they lost interest to this subject. So that's, I think that's separate, which featured just Soviet Union as such.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this sort of degree of connection. It's very much about how much of a link and what a role the Scandinavians had, I suppose.
And I think all this discussion between Normanism and anti-Normanism, it was pretty much basically based on these written sources, which have quite a late character. And of course, archaeology could actually contribute much more new material. And this is why it became more important in this discussion, because these finds we are finding them more and more in different places of Eastern Europe, and they need to be explained.
Yeah, and we're going to get back a little bit later on to how those different countries relate to that later on. But just a little bit about you as well. So you were appointed museum director in March 2020, so quite recently. But your background is as an archaeologist from Kiev originally. But tell us a bit about how you got to that role.
Well, as I said, the Ukraine, it has actually a little bit secondary, it played secondary part in this discussion. And the reason for this was because very few finds of Scandinavian origin have been noted in Ukraine, apart from one site, which is called Shistovitsa in Chernihiv area. Which revealed a lot of Scandinavian objects. And that is why I became interested in this contrast. And this has became a part, the subject for my dissertation, which was focused basically on the Byzantine and Scandinavian context of this particular area. So I will try to explain how it can be explained in terms with the other Scandinavian sites. So this was the start. And actually, yes, I've done my PhD at the Kiev University, and been working there as a lecturer, and until I was invited by Stockholm University to take part in the excavation of garrison in Birka. And it was 2 months, and it was very important to get in touch with the real stuff and to learn much more about what is going on in Scandinavian archaeology. So I discovered that we need to be a little bit, we need to read the same books, So otherwise this discussion will be like create two different worlds. So I have been interested in a military aspect of Scandinavia, particularly swords. So I decided to make a kind of project about this, but for this I need to be to visit Sweden. And that time, nobody in Sweden knew actually how many swords in Sweden. So it was the time you are post-processual archaeology, and it was theory basically everywhere. And they have quite quite a lot of interest in theoretical approaches, but well, to make a kind of solid of this material, it was impossible. So I was actually needed to go through this material myself, and it took time. So I started with the Swedish History Museum, and this was the largest collection. It is still the largest collection of this material, and then visited Gästrikland, Gotland, and other provincial Swedish museum, and then it became obviously I need to have a kind of comparative material to see how it's looked like in Norway and Sweden. So that is why I went to Norway and studied in Oslo and Trondheim, and of course Denmark, and of course well, Iceland was interesting for me, so I visited Iceland and started weapon there. So that is why I got a kind of quite good insight in this material culture of Scandinavia, which helped me actually to understand much more what is Scandinavia and what is not. Yeah. So that it's then pretty much influenced the catalogue of Scandinavian antiquities, which I published with our Ukrainian colleague Vladimir Zotsenko.
And then, so you sort of came from this background where you're coming out as this legacy of this anti-nominist debate, and then you actually went out, got all this experience from the wider Viking world, bringing that back to
yes, of course, because
Ukrainian
otherwise
context.
it would be difficult to explain why these strange things appears actually in that area, and this discussion about the origin of Russian status, but it didn't fit actually at all. Well, and then of course, you know, to complete this project, because if I would know that how many years it should take, I don't know. I'm not sure that I would start it, but because you need to find finding, and you know, to get other types of jobs. So on the other hand, it creates a different experience as well. So I've been working as a scholar, researcher, and associated researcher in Stockholm University and Uppsala University. I published other books and working in contract archaeology as well, and also exhibition. I think I like exhibition. It's interesting and creative form to create and to share your knowledge. So and 2003, the Museum of Swedish History had a very interesting project. It was a traveling exhibition of very good made copies of rune stones with the inscription telling us about Vikings in the East, what they were doing there. And this exhibition was also planned for Kiev, and we traveled there, and because I had contacts all the time, and we decided to make it a little bit differently and to pick up this Scandinavian artifacts from the collection of the museum. And that is why I get inside of this museum, and I understand the capacity, what can be actually done. But in that time, of course, I didn't have any ideas or plans to be director of this museum. It's just happened. Yes.
So I mean, it's a really interesting concept, and we'll get back to that later on. These international connections, which have actually become important very recently. But I want to move on then to the current war and the Russian invasion. So you were there. You're sort of quite recently in this post. Can you talk me through what actually happened on the day of the invasion in your day, and whether that was something that you had been able to prepare for in advance?
Well, of course, Ukraine has been in this war. I mean, since 2014. So it's not just something which it's happened in one day or two. And so it has been a lot of discussion, expectation, and stuff. But I think most people they never been expecting that it's happened in such way. Actually, so particularly with these missiles and rockets and bombs, and which actually hit in the residential buildings, and so it was something that we didn't expect, of course. So that is why I was awakened by my colleague. It's about 5 o'clock or something in the morning, and she was saying that the Kyiv city airport has bombing, So it was actually, well, I understand that we need to dismantle everything because otherwise it will just disappeared. And yeah, and this is what the task actually. So that is what when I was on the way to the museum, it was like it take 30 minutes or something. So it was, yeah, I actually didn't know how many people show up this morning, because it's, of course, if you hear these sounds well, this creates completely different reality, and it's of course the people begin thinking about the relatives, the families, and these things are the most important. So I didn't know actually how many people, but anyway, when I came, that was I think I don't remember exactly, but it's we have just 20 people, and anyway showed up, 25 in that morning in this main building of museum. And it was striking that it was people of different occupation, because the museum is quite a complex institution. There are technical personnel, there are scholars, there are security guys, and there are even lawyers. All they came. So it's an interesting day. All day we involved in this dismantling of these objects. So it's basically the whole day, and I think half night. So yeah, it's basically very roughly the same. Well, how it began in day. Yeah, so.
And then this went on for quite a while, this sort of urgent, immediate work, and you actually more or less moved into the museum, didn't you, for quite some time?
Yes, because we didn't know how it's, well, what happened next, though. That is why I have decided we need to see this, how it's will be developing, and it's a huge responsibility. I mean, the material and people. So I just decided I need to see how it's. And well, that is why I think it took almost 1 month or something. We reside in the building of the museum, and of course some days we were visiting homes or to change clothes and stuff like that.
Have a shower.
But basically we were preoccupied and the life in the museum. So yes.
And one of the questions is sort of how do you go about prioritizing, on that first day? What sort of things do you go to first? Did you have any plans or any manuals or any instructions for how to do that?
Yeah, it's basically there is a kind of, well, one instruction. It was written in the Soviet time, 1997 or 1970 or something like that. It's basically describe how what you need to be done, well, in cases like this. But of course it's a little bit updated, because they were thinking about that first priority is monuments and sites and material objects which are connected to the Communist Party. So that's something you need to change first, and to set and to reorganize your priorities. So it's but in any, yes, and in such cases it's important to have a kind of priority list. The first category, the second, and the third. So that's basically the way we have been working.
And in terms of being, as you said, you weren't expecting this to happen. So just interesting what sort of support you got for that, and whether you had the materials you needed and that sort of thing.
Well, in such cases, of course, the panic is the worst thing. I think that the main the government's policy, it was to be secured. The panic, it's the worst. And I think it's a good tactic, because that if people see that's what happens, so that the whole this traffic be jumped. There's no way that military could actually pass to the. So in this way, it's quite understandable. But of course, when we didn't know what happens, but it became obviously that we in a huge lack of material stuff. I mean, the packing material. many museums that basically didn't have a lot of, you know, these containers and stuff like that, even packing and even this material to protect objects from the fires. So we started, actually we've been contacted by different humanitarian institutions which actually offered the help, and of course we got help, and I'm actually very grateful to the Blue Shield Denmark, who actually has provided 3 huge loads of the goods to our museums, and then we shared to other museums, particularly those small which are situated in the eastern part of Ukraine, and had very limited resources for this. So this is basically how it worked. And of course then the issue of money, because, you know, that's when the war that happens at a completely different priority in the society. So it's all money goes to the weaponry, and of course the culture, it's something which not very well in the first place. So it's I've initiated in any way the need to collect some funding to support this museum. And we got quite a lot of help from the Nordic Scandinavia. It's of course because I have quite, let's say,
you have connections and networks already.
So and they have a lot of help from Scandinavian museums, and they started the collecting of money, and a particular fund that has been created by the Nordic Museum. So I'm very grateful for all the help.
I just remind everyone watching at home, if you want to help, if you've got any contributions, I think Fedir and his colleagues will be very, very grateful. So look on the YouTube description and you get all the details for how you can get money, which goes directly to them, nothing to university, nothing to history hit, it's straight to you, and that will be used very wisely, I'm sure. So this sort of work then, so you said it was about a month. The first month was very much about the immediate, you know, stopping things going on. But this is now about 5 months down the line. So after that, that had sort of been finished really, and the situation in Kyiv now is reasonably stable for the time being. What was the next step? I mean, what did you do after that? And were you able to engage with the public, open the museum, anything like that?
Of course, a museum is a complex institution which is dealing with a different kind of activity. It's not only public work, but it's also research and restoration works, and also registrations work. We are working with different database, and we are behind of the process of digitalization. This is basically quite a lot of, and it is particularly in these cases we need to do it. So this was basically some directions which we are dealing with. But of course, now we have reduced the number of the core workers. There's quite many people are left the country. So and then also when yes, we were also trying to make a kind of research. It became very obviously that people after they began to return to the city, they were trying to find information if does museum work still, and we were asking what kind of exhibition do you want to see, just and they quite a lot of interested in the those exhibitions featuring the old ancient history. So I think it probably was actually something that people need to be something important for identity of people. So that is why we started to think that we need to start to do something. But of course it's very difficult because the worst is still going on. We can't not take responsibility, to do a huge exhibition, and we don't have money actually, a lot of it. But one thing which we we have made field work actually when the Russian forces retreated. So our work is they visited all these battle places and collected some objects which were related to these events.
So these new battle sites that had just been,
yes. So, and then we have decided to make an installation or exhibition of it, which actually called the Invasion. Actually, so it's basically devoted to this event, and we have made I think in 1 month or something. So it's still in the museum.
So you're actually going out and new fieldwork, collecting objects related to this conflict and displaying them. And I guess the sort of interpretation of that is just as a way of showing people.
Yes, they can visit and draw their own conclusions. So that's because it's different objects which actually saying about what kind of these people, what they were doing, what they were actually occupations, and what kind of methodological or propaganda instruction did they have actually.
Yeah, so did you find things like
that
relating
was
to
very interesting document. Yes, that was a methodological instruction about how these soldiers need to explain the activity, and what they are doing, and what who is actually what is wrong in this situation, and who is actually need to pay, or something like that. But it's
you get the sort of physical objects and the sort of see the other side, I suppose. So people get to see the other side.
It's basically we collect from different places. It was European, Bucha, I think Gastomel and different. It's not, we don't. We are not collecting tanks and stuff like that. No. Just small things, which actually can tell it something interesting. I think it's.
And that's a really interesting way of using objects as a way of telling that, which is exactly what we do in archaeology. We look at the Viking objects and think, what messages are those objects telling us? Yes. And here is a very current, how that sort of physical.
Yes. That's,
which is a great way. And I mean, do you know, is that something that's being done outside of Ukraine in Russia, for example? Do they have museum exhibitions relating to the war as well?
So far, no. It's at least two exhibitions. They had one of them probably 2 months something ago. It was actually organized by the Victory Museum in Moscow. I think and it's actually it's devoted to the origin of Ukrainian nationalism. So it's I think it's a small message. It's just to explain for the people the reason for the special operation in Ukraine. So it's I think apparently a bit of propaganda things. That's and another one is a great exhibition, a huge exhibition. It's very, I think it's called the Peter the Great, the origin of empire, something like that. So it's yes, it's interesting because we didn't know that, but at the same time we have made another exhibition which was devoted to Ivan Mazepa, who was actually a very interesting person and politician, even in the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th century. And he was collaborator of the Swedish king Charles the XII in Swedish, and he it's interesting because he's very educated and he has a kind plans for European plans for Ukraine, which were never be realized. But in any way, it's interesting. We didn't plan it, but it's like I think this exhibition shows obviously a different approaches what museums shall do. And I think in Russia it's kind of a very powerful tool of. It's been actually all the time. It's a powerful tool of soft power. I mean, to spread knowledge, to spread culture. So that's in such way. So that's I think we build on a basically not. We share knowledge. I think it's which is based on the scientific, proved information.
Yeah.
So I think it's important.
And I think that contrast in what you were talking about is sort of exhibition that you're doing, which is really just trying to contextualize, trying to explain to people what's happening, maybe the other side that they don't see. It's quite sharp contrast, and I just wanted to highlight a statement from Mikhail Petrovsky, who's the director of the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, who in a series of interviews has been talking about their approach. And he actually said that our recent, this is a citation from a newspaper article, our recent exhibitions abroad are just a powerful cultural offensive, if you want, a kind of special operation, which is the same word they use about the actual invasion, which a lot of people don't like. And he also talks about the historical mission of the country and how the museum's roles are sort of very much a part of that. And I think there is a quite strong contrast to that approach to the history, to the objects, and how you relate to people. But I think getting back a little bit to why we're here in Liverpool today, I'm thinking again about the objects and about that history, and especially going back to the Viking Age and where we sort of started in the first place. Because actually that Viking past is still being used in very different ways in Ukraine and Russia as a part of this whole, I suppose, historical mission, certainly in Russia. So could you explain to us a little bit about how Russia and Ukraine differ in the way that they see that Viking past?
I think Russian scholarship is basically preoccupied with only one problem: it's origin of Russian state. It's pretty much they are very happy to do, and but quite a lot of such research is based on written sources which have a later origin, and this is contrasts against the Ukrainian scholarships, which actually dealing with issues such like what origin of these sources, what was actually ideological implication to create them, and stuff like that. And particularly they highlight in this chronological distance between the tale of begun years and the events it described, 200 years gap. I think it's important to know. So and that is why it's important to know where come this information from, which the chronicle was relying. So, and it's obviously the role of archaeology is considerable, because archaeology can tell us a completely different story. And particularly during recently time, there are a lot of new information. Archaeology revealed also casual made finds. And what is interesting, we have quite, I think, interesting collection of objects dated to the Vendel period, the 7th century, 8th century. Some of them are quite high status.
Pre-Viking Age, yeah.
Yes, or I think it's probably something we need to rethink about the beginning of the Viking Age. But what is important at the time, it's a bit saying something about contacts between Scandinavia and the population of Ukraine at that time, which was actually previous to this when the Rurika dynasty installed in Kiev. So I think this is very interesting, and this can be a new page actually in this story.
Yeah. And that is very exciting, because I think there really is so much about this that we really don't know yet, and we need to go back to those objects and go back and look at it, and sort of what you're doing, which is connecting it back to Scandinavia, and of course I think that relationship between scholars in the East and Scandinavia and the West is been quite a difficult one in the past because of historical situations.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
so it's a kind of, I mean, do you feel that that's quite a positive, that we'll be able to sort of rewrite a lot of that history?
Well, I think it's a new stage in some way, but before this, most of Viking Congress activity was basically concentrated on the presenting results of studies which actually, were dealing with the western part of the Viking world, and eastern part was basically very few presented. I think that we do it. It's very few delegates which could actually present. But it's important to remember that the eastern part of the Viking world was very important, and it's also quite early period of time, and we can find still a lot of new information which can actually contribute to our current knowledge about the Viking Age heritage.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting, and I think new technologies as well are helping
with
this
of course. It's
scientific. There's a lot that's just happening now that I think we can start to answer those, and really confront some of those narratives that we've been
that's right.
quite used to telling. I think just to sort of, before we welcome questions, if we take a bit of a step back and look at the wider picture here, so both in terms of the archaeology and the history and what's happening now in the museums, how you're using objects, how do you feel that all of these things play a role in this war, and what's the sort of, why is it important, and what's all of this about?
Well, I think it's important to understand that I'm pretty sure that this war about identities. We are struggling for our identities, and this is not the war between the Russians and the Ukrainians, because a lot of many folks, ancient folks and nations have left or contributed to the culture of Ukraine. They left their material culture, which make Ukraine important for all nations actually. And I think it's important to see the Ukrainian heritage. It's a common responsibility, and I think this is something that Russia needs to be aware.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to end it. Thank you. So we've got some questions from the audience watching this at home. So I'm just going to go through some of those. Some of them relate a bit to that Viking history. Do we actually have any idea of how many Scandinavians really came and settled in Ukraine? Do we have any answers to that question yet?
It's very difficult to count. Yet it's because physically we can't see these people. Yes, because probably even it's very difficult to find them in the cemetery, some cemeteries, because you know, they just probably can't preserve, or we don't have much information. But I think it's important probably to see the on the other hand, if we compare the number of Scandinavian artifacts in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe, and so it's Eastern Europe, I think, with my impressions, reveal much more. But also on the other hand, it's still discussion what objects can be identified as a Scandinavian or inspired by Scandinavian culture. It's important to know also. So and the British art is a good example to see. There are a lot of such different examples. So I think to see how much it's well, there are a lot of attempts have been made by historians, but I don't know how it's true actually. So it's
no.
I don't have a ready answer for this question.
No, that's fair. I think that's one of the things we're all hoping eventually will come out. And there's also some other questions about things like trading. So I've got one question of evidence which relates a bit to that for trade networks in Ukraine in the Viking Age. I mean, how much do we know about those networks that Ukraine was part of at the time?
Well, I think here's on the one hand, we have written sources telling us about the importance of slaves, and also fair trade as well. The finds of silver coinage, particularly Islamic coinage on the territory of Ukraine, it's important and shows kind of probably trade transactions which were going on in territory Ukraine, and of course the content of these swords reveal the connections between Khazars and other Islamic, different parts of Islamic world with the the territory of Ukraine. So, and of course there are the horse is very interesting source of information, because it's actually can reveal different direction of this context, which actually lead not just to the east but also to the west and north and stuff like this. So that is why it's important to study on. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so one question is about archaeological sites and the impact of the war. Do you know at the moment how archaeological sites in the country have been impacted, or is that not really?
There are different methods to evaluate this, and I know that actually there are different institutions which have been working on these questions. I think UNESCO gives us something like 100, 150 or something objects that, and it's different. I mean, it's churches, it's cultural buildings, it's schools, it's a library, it's a residential buildings. But what is important, if you check this this list, what is striking, there's quite a lot of, or quite a big part of these damaged sites. Actually, it's a memorial site dedicated to the Second World War. Okay. And this is basically a part of Russian propaganda, because they always, you know, going back to the victory, Можем повторить and stuff like that. So that's a but by destroying this, and you know that in that war, the Ukrainians took part as well. So these parts, these sites are kind of the sites which has a common memory, and then being destroyed. So that's, I think, is something that very important need to understand in this situation.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's going to be the end of what we've got time for our live questions. But Fedir, thank you so much for taking part.
Thank you for having me.
Really delighted. We're happy you're here, you're safe, and that you're continuing all of this work. And that just brings me to the end of it. And then we are obviously very grateful to the Viking Congress and to University of Liverpool for having us here, British Academy, and also to History Hit for live streaming it, bringing it out to the world. So people can watch this recorded later on.